On December 5, 1945, 5 U.S. Navy bombers took off from Florida in perfect weather. None of them would ever come home. Flight 19 was supposed to be a routine training mission. 5 TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, each carrying a crew of 3 men. 14 men total, experienced pilots. Clear skies. A route they'd flown 100 times before. Everything pointed to an easy afternoon over the Atlantic. But something went catastrophically wrong. 25 minutes into the flight, the lead pilot, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, radioed the control tower. His voice cracked with confusion. "Control, this is Flight 19. We have a problem. Both my compasses are out. I can't find my position." The controller tried to help. "Stay calm," they said. "Follow the sun. You're over the Bahamas. Turn west toward Florida." But Taylor's response chilled everyone listening. "I don't know where we are. We must have gotten lost after that last turn." For the next 2 hours, Flight 19 circled over the Atlantic. Taylor's voice grew more desperate. The other pilots reported their fuel running critically low. The radio transmissions became increasingly frantic. "We're heading northeast, I think," Taylor said. I'm not sure where we are." Then, at 4:13 p.m., Taylor made one final transmission. His words are burned into history. "We are on the line north and south. We're following the beach line north. Everything is green, and we don't see Miami. Nothing is familiar here." And then, silence. The tower called and called. Flight 19 never responded again. Immediately, the Navy launched a massive search and rescue operations. They sent a PBM Mariner patrol plane with a crew of 13 to look for survivors. That plane also vanished without a trace. In total, that day swallowed 14 trained military personnel in broad daylight, in calm weather, over American waters. For decades, people speculated wildly. The Bermuda Triangle conspiracy took hold. Supernatural forces, alien abductions, time warps. The theories multiplied endlessly because the truth remained buried. Here's what we actually know. Lieutenant Taylor's compasses failing was the first domino. Without navigational instruments, he couldn't tell east from west. When he thought he was heading west toward Florida, he was actually flying northeast into the open Atlantic. His fuel lasted just long enough to carry him and his 4 wingmen further out to sea before running empty. The PBM that was sent to find them? An experienced sailor saw that exact aircraft take off that day. It was reported to have had chronic fuel leaks. Most believe it ran out of fuel over the vast ocean and ditched. But here's what still haunts investigators. Despite the massive search covering thousands of square miles, not a single piece of wreckage was ever recovered. No debris, no bodies, no life rafts, nothing. 14 men, 6 aircraft involved that day. 14 men vanished into the Atlantic, and the ocean gave back nothing. Everything is green, and we don't see Miami. Nothing is familiar here. On March 31, 1922, 6 people vanished from a remote farmhouse in Bavaria. But they didn't just disappear. Their bodies were found weeks later in the most horrifying circumstances imaginable, and the killer was never caught. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're examining one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in European history, the Hinterkaifeck murders. Andreas Gruber was a 63-year-old farmer living on the isolated Hinterkaifeck farm near Munich. On March 21, 1922, everything changed when he reported something bizarre to the police. He claimed he'd seen mysterious footprints in the snow leading from the forest directly to his farm. He said someone had been following him. The police investigated but found nothing. They dismissed him as paranoid. But Andreas knew something was terribly wrong. Just days later, on March 31st, the entire Gruber family, Andreas, his wife Kazilia, their daughter Victoria, grandchildren Kazilia and Joseph, and their maid Maria, stopped communicating with the outside world completely. The farm went silent. Neighbors noticed something was off. Animals weren't being cared for. There were no signs of life. For weeks, nobody checked on them. It wasn't until April 4th that a neighbor finally approached the farmhouse. What he found would haunt him forever. The bodies were discovered hidden throughout the property. Andreas and Kazilia were found in the barn, their skulls crushed with a mattock. Victoria was discovered in the attic, her face beaten beyond recognition. The children were found wrapped in blankets and bedding. Maria's remains were hidden in a storage area, decomposing in the darkness. But here's what makes this case truly nightmarish. There's evidence someone stayed in that house after the murders. The family's food had been eaten. A fire was burning in the stove. Drawers had been opened and ransacked. Someone had been living amongst the corpses, sleeping in the beds, eating from the kitchen, surrounded by death. The police found footprints, size 38 shoes, walking between rooms, in and out of the house. Whoever did this hadn't fled. They'd lingered. They'd remained at the scene, perhaps for days, moving through rooms where decomposing bodies lay. Over 100 suspects were investigated. A drifter was arrested, and Andreas's own son Carl became the prime suspect after he tried to collect insurance money on his deceased relatives. But without conclusive evidence, no one was ever charged. No one was ever convicted. The case went cold. Decades passed, and the murderer, or murderers, took their secrets to the grave. What makes Hinterkaifeck truly disturbing isn't just the violence. It's the thought of someone standing in that farmhouse, surrounded by death, comfortable enough to stay. It's the mystery of motivation. Was it robbery? Revenge? The ravings of a disturbed killer? We'll never know. The farm eventually burned down today. The land is empty, except for a small memorial marker. Hikers avoid the area. And somewhere in the historical records of Bavaria sits a case file that remains closed, unsolved, and inexplicable. 6 people died at Hinterkaifeck, and whoever murdered them got away with it. If you've heard theories about this case, share them in the comments. Thanks for watching. On December 4, 1872, a merchant ship was discovered floating silently through the Atlantic Ocean, completely abandoned, not a single soul on board. Here's what makes this case truly haunting. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no bodies, just an empty ship, with meals still warm on the tables and a child's toy scattered across the deck. This is the story of the Mary Celeste, one of history's most chilling maritime mysteries. The Mary Celeste left New York Harbor on November 7, 1872, captained by Benjamin Briggs. On board were 10 people. The captain, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 crew members. Their destination was Genoa, Italy, carrying a cargo of commercial alcohol. Everything seemed normal. The weather was favorable. The crew was experienced. Captain Briggs had an impeccable record. By all accounts, it should have been a routine voyage. But it wasn't. 2 weeks into the journey, another ship, the Dei Gratia, spotted the Mary Celeste sailing erratically through the water. The crew of the Dei Gratia noticed something was wrong immediately. The sails were partially torn. The rigging was damaged. And there was no one on deck. When they boarded the Mary Celeste, what they found was absolutely bizarre. The captain's cabin was neat and orderly. The crew's quarters were clean. This ship's log was up to date. The last entry made on November 25th, just 10 days before discovery. But the crew? Gone. All 10 of them vanished without a trace. Here's what made investigators' blood run cold. The ship's lifeboat was missing, yet there were no signs of panic or emergency abandonment. The crew's personal belongings were still aboard. Money was in the captain's quarters. Sarah's sewing kit sat untouched on a table. The galley still had food prepared for meals. Most disturbing of all, a rope was found trailing over the side of the ship, hanging into the water below. Theories exploded across maritime circles. Some believed the crew had abandoned ship during an emergency. But why? The ship wasn't sinking. The cargo wasn't even damaged. Others suggested mutiny, or that the crew had murdered the captain and his family. But the evidence simply didn't support that. There was no blood, no violence, nothing. The official inquiry concluded that the crew had panicked and abandoned ship for unknown reasons, but that explanation satisfied no one. Panic doesn't explain the orderliness of the cabins. It doesn't explain the warm meals. It doesn't explain why 10 experienced sailors would suddenly decide their ship was unsafe when it clearly wasn't. Over the years, investigators proposed increasingly desperate theories. Maybe they were attacked by a giant squid. Maybe there was an explosion in the hold that killed everyone, and their bodies simply washed overboard. Maybe they were picked up by another ship that never reported the incident. But none of these theories hold up under scrutiny. The Mary Celeste eventually made it to port under salvage, but the mystery of what happened to Captain Briggs, his family, and his 7 crew members was never solved. The ship was eventually abandoned and deliberately destroyed after multiple accidents and misfortunes, as if it carried a curse. To this day, historians argue about what really happened. The ship's log ends abruptly. The lifeboat was never recovered, and 10 human beings simply ceased to exist on that cold November day in 1872. Some mysteries have answers hiding in the shadows, but the Mary Celeste? It sailed those shadows alone, carrying its secrets down into the deep.